Rain lashed against the windows, cascading in rivulets that blurred the jagged outline of the island until it was little more than a dark smear against the roiling grey sky. I sat huddled near the window, the cold seeping through the glass as the wind howled like a beast around us. The island had always seemed like a place out of time, but today it felt hostile, as though it were warning us to turn back, to flee before the tempest fully claimed us. This was my first retreat, and the invitation still felt like a puzzle I wasn't sure I could solve. An obscure writer like me, invited alongside celebrated names of Evelyn, heart chief among them. Evelyn, the literary titan whose novels had shaped generations, was already a figure larger than life, even before she arrived. Sitting here amidst the storm, I wondered what truths hid beneath her polished veneer. The ferry docked with a shudder, the ropes straining against the wind as we disembarked hurriedly. The other guests moved with a mixture of excitement and unease, their faces drawn tight against the rain. Jonas Reed, the retreat organizer, stood waiting, a tall, broad-shouldered man whose casual but practical clothing seemed oddly at odds with the storm's fury. His expression was all business, scanning arrivals with a protective scrutiny that offered some small comfort. As we approached the estate, its silhouette emerged from the mistan imposing structure of dark stone and sharp angles, looming like a fortress against the storm. The wind whipped through the trees, carrying the scent of salt and damp earth, a wildness that seemed to seep from the very bones of the island. Inside, the air was thick with warmth and the faint temps of old wood and leather-bound books. The grand hall was dimly lit by flickering candles, their flames trembling in the draught that slipped beneath the heavy doors. Guests clustered in tentative groups, polite smiles masking guarded eyes. It was clear from the start that beneath the cultivated civility lay currents of rivalry. Old alliances strained and new ones yet to form. Evelyn Hart stood apart, a striking figure with silver-streaked dark hair that caught the candlelight, her piercing eyes sweeping the room with an inscrutable gaze. She spoke little, but commanded attention whenever she did, her presence a gravitational force drawing and repelling in equal measure. I found myself both drawn to and wary of her, sensing that beneath her charismatic surface lay secrets better left unspoken. I drifted through the crowd, offering measured hellos and cautious smiles. Clara Finch, a young writer with soft features and expressive eyes, caught my glance and returned it with a warmth that felt like a lifeline. Her curiosity and openness were a comfort amid the subtle hostilities that crackled like static in the air. Jonas moved among us, his demeanor steady but edged with tension. I caught snippets of his low-voiced conversations, his attempts to maintain order in a gathering already fraying at the edges. As the storm outside grew fiercer, the estate seemed to shrink around us, its walls pressing in like the pages of a book closing tight. The threat of isolation was palpable, and with it, a growing sense of unease that gnawed at the edges of my thoughts. Suddenly, the lights flickered and died, plunging us into darkness. A collective gasp rose from the gathering, the storm's fury now matched by the claustrophobic shadows that swallowed the room. The crack of thunder was deafening, and in that moment, the fragile veneer of civility cracked, revealing the raw nerves beneath. I felt my pulse quicken, the whisper of paranoia stirring as I glanced around at the faces barely visible in the gloom. What stories were hidden here? What grudges? What jealousies? The storm outside was nothing compared to the tempest gathering within these walls. I clutched my notebook tighter, the weight of the retreat's promise and its peril settling over me. This was the beginning, and already I could feel the edge of something dark and dangerous cutting through the air. The night stretched on, filled with whispered speculations, and the restless rustle of uneasy guests. I found myself alone near the window once more, staring out at the relentless storm, wondering how many secrets the island could hold in, how many would be lost to the darkness before dawn. But one thing was certain, nothing here was as it seemed, and I was already caught in the storm's eye, with no clear way out. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with the scent of rain and wood smoke, the flickering firelight casting long shadows that danced across the ornate furnishings. It was in this charged setting that Evelyn Hart came alive, or at least that was how it appeared to me. She was impossible to ignore. From the moment she entered the grand sitting room that evening, her presence seemed to bend the air itself. Her silver-streaked dark hair gleamed under the low light, framing a face that was simultaneously elegant and inscrutable. Piercing eyes scanned the room with a calm, measured intensity, as if she were absorbing every detail not merely to observe, but to possess it. I lingered on the edge of the gathering, heart pounding with a mix of anticipation and nerves. To be honest, I wasn't sure why Evelyn herself had invited me, a relatively unknown writer, overshadowed by the likes of her and others here. But here I was, caught in the gravity of her orbit, desperate for even a scrap of recognition. As she spoke, her voice was low and deliberate, weaving stories and insights that captivated the room. Yet beneath the charisma was a subtle undercurrent of something else, a guardedness, a secrecy that hinted at shadows lurking just beneath the surface. She smiled often, but those smiles were cryptic, almost teasing, as though she alone held keys to truths none of us could yet grasp. I attempted to approach her during a lull in the conversation, words rehearsed but faltering as I stepped into her light. "Ms. Hart," I began, voice barely steady, "I've been meaning to ask about your manuscript. The fragments I've seen are quite extraordinary." Her eyes flickered briefly toward me, a glint that was, perhaps amusement, perhaps something darker. "Extraordinary, yes," she replied softly, "but incomplete. Much like us all, aren't we?" The comment was both an invitation and a puzzle. I wanted to press further, but before I could, she was drawn away by another guest, leaving me standing awkwardly in the hush that followed. Around us, the guests whispered. Clara Finch, whose youthful warmth was a balm to my nerves, shared her impressions with a quiet enthusiasm. "Evelyn is a force of nature," she said, eyes shining with admiration. "But there's a sadness there, too, like she's carrying something heavy that she won't or can't share." Jonas Reed, ever the pragmatist, grunted his skepticism. "She's brilliant, no doubt, but this place isn't a playground. There are histories and grudges here that even Evelyn's charm can't smooth over." The storm outside seemed to echo Jonas's words, the wind rising in a crescendo that rattled the windows and made the candles flicker. I felt a shiver that wasn't entirely due to the cold. Later, when the crowd had thinned, I found myself wandering the corridors, drawn inexplicably toward the door of Evelyn's private writing room. It was slightly ajar, a thin slice of warm, golden light spilling into the dark hallway. Inside, she sat hunched over her desk, the incomplete manuscript spread before her like a sacred text. Her fingers traced the words with a possessive intensity, lips moving in silent incantation. I hesitated, caught between intrusion and fascination. Was she aware I was there? Did she welcome an audience? Or was this a moment meant for her alone? The air was thick with something I could not name: obsession, desperation, a fierce determination to wrest meaning from the chaos. My own reflection in the glass pane beside the door stared back at me, pale and uncertain. The storm raged on, and with it, a growing sense that beneath Evelyn's radiant exterior lay a labyrinth of secrets, and that my place in this unfolding drama was far from incidental. As the night deepened, so did my introspection. Every glance, every whispered exchange, every cryptic remark seemed to carry weight beyond immediate understanding. I found myself questioning not just Evelyn, but my own perceptions. Was I grasping at truths, or merely chasing shadows born from my insecurities? The storm was no longer just outside. It had crept inside me, stirring doubts and fears that I could neither silence nor fully comprehend. And yet, despite the unease, I was drawn deeper into Evelyn's world, into the magnetic pull of her presence, and the incomplete manuscript that haunted us all. The night closed around the retreat like a shroud, and I knew that what had begun as a gathering of writers was fast becoming something far more dangerous, tangled in webs of suspicion and secrets that would not easily unravel. And so, as I lay awake listening to the wind's mournful song, I wondered what truth lay hidden behind Evelyn's enigmatic smile, and what price would we pay to uncover it. The answer, I sensed, was waiting in the shadows, waiting for me to find it or to be consumed by it. I found myself drawn back to Evelyn's private writing room, the one she had kept locked for most of the retreat, now left open in the wake of her death. The air inside was thick with the scent of aged paper and faint traces of ink, a scent that felt almost sacred, as if it held the residue of her genius and secrets. I sat at the heavy oak desk, the single lamp casting a pool of yellowed light over the scattered pages of her unfinished manuscript. The edges were frayed, the handwriting meticulous yet hurried in places, as if she had been racing against some unseen clock. I hesitated before touching the first page, my fingers trembling not from the cold, though the room was chill, but from a strange mix of reverence and fear. The words seemed to breathe beneath my gaze. Lines of text spoke of a shadow stalking an isolated house, of whispered betrayals, and of a truth too dangerous to be told. At times, the narrative shifted abruptly, twisting like the storm outside, leaving me unsure if I was reading a story or a confession. I found myself reading, rereading, searching for patterns, for clues that might explain Evelyn's sudden death and the growing sense of menace that clung to the island. Hours passed unnoticed. The storm's fury outside rose and fell like a living thing, but inside, time behaved differently. My thoughts became a tangled web, each fragment of the manuscript sparking new questions and darker speculations. I scribbled notes in the margins, connecting names, events, and even fleeting glances I'd exchanged with other guests. The lines between Evelyn's fiction and our reality blurred unsettlingly. A sudden knock broke my concentration. Clara Finch entered quietly, her expression soft but concerned. "You've been holed up here all day," she said, her voice a gentle contrast to the storm's howl. "Are you all right?" I forced a smile, but it felt brittle. "I'm trying to make sense of it all," I admitted. "This manuscript hits like a puzzle, but some pieces keep changing shape." She settled into the chair opposite me, her eyes wide and searching. "You're not alone in feeling that. There's something about this place, and about Evelyn, that unsettles everyone. But you have to be careful not to lose yourself in it." Her words echoed a warning I already sensed but refused to heed. The more I delved into the manuscript, the more I felt my grip on reality loosening. Memories I thought were solid wavered, and shadows flickered at the edge of my vision. I caught myself questioning whether the fear was truly external or born from the depths of my own mind. Later that evening, I crossed paths with Jonas Reed in the dim hallway. His presence was a stern reminder of order amidst chaos. He gave me a curt nod, but I saw the tension in his jaw. "You should rest," he said quietly. "Obsessing over those pages won't help anyone." I wanted to argue, to tell him that the manuscript held answers, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I nodded, retreating to my room where the storm's cries were joined by the relentless beating of my own heart. Alone, the weight of Evelyn's words pressed down like the rain outside, and I wondered how much of what I saw and felt was real and how much was the fragile mind of a writer spiraling into darkness. As I lay awake, the manuscript's cryptic lines seemed to rewrite themselves in my mind, shifting like the storm's shadows. The house groaned, the rain slashed against the glass, and somewhere in the distance, a door slammed shut. I was trapped between pages and reality, the boundaries dissolving, and the fear that what I sought was not truth, but a deeper, darker obsession. And yet, I could not stop turning the pages. To be continued. I found myself pressed against the cold glass, watching the chaotic dance of rain and wind outside, the world beyond reduced to a blur of grey and shadow. The thunder rolled overhead, a low growl that seemed to echo the anxious unease settling deep within me. Inside, the flickering candlelight cast long, uncertain shadows across the polished wood floors and towering bookshelves, their contents silent witnesses to the mounting tension. Jonas Reed, the retreat's organizer, was attempting to hold the fragile piece together. I caught sight of him in the common room, his broad shoulders tightening as he addressed the assembled guests. His voice, usually firm and unshakable, carried an undercurrent of strain, the kind of weariness that speaks of sleepless nights and too many unanswered questions. "We're all safe here," he said, though even to my ears, it sounded more like a plea than a reassurance. The storm outside seemed to seep into the room, choking the air with a thick, restless energy. I drifted away from the gathering, my thoughts swirling like the tempest beyond the walls. The faces around me flickered in my memory. Evelyn Hart, regal and enigmatic even in repose. Felix Morland, with his cynical smirk. Sophie Lane, poised and watchful. Yet it was Clara Finch who drew me in most tonight. Her youthful warmth was a rare balm in this place, her eyes bright with curiosity and kindness. I found myself seeking her out, needing the comfort her presence offered. In the quiet refuge of the library, amidst the scent of aged paper and polished oak, Clara sat beside me. "You look like you're carrying the weight of the storm inside you," she said softly, her voice a gentle contrast to the howling wind. I hesitated before nodding, the words caught in my throat. She didn't press, just offered a steady gaze that invited trust, a rare gift for someone as guarded as I had become. Yet even as I leaned toward this fragile connection, the shadows lengthened. I noticed, almost involuntarily, the door to Evelyn's writing room, a normally closed sanctuary, stood slightly ajar. A faint flicker of candlelight spilled into the dark hallway, a secret beacon in the gathering gloom. It was a small thing, but it prickled my skin, a whispered hint that all was not as it seemed. The guests' behaviors grew stranger with each passing hour. Murmurs that cut off when I entered a room, glances exchanged in the corners of my vision, the subtle stiffening of shoulders when certain names were mentioned. My mind raced, juggling facts and doubts, spinning webs of suspicion that tangled tighter with every thought. I scribbled notes obsessively, desperate to pin down the shifting shapes of truth and deception. Jonas's attempts at control faltered as the storm raged on, the island becoming a claustrophobic cage. His furrowed brow betrayed his inner turmoil, a man caught between duty and fear. Clara remained my anchor, her steady presence a fragile thread in the growing storm of my paranoia. As night deepened, The sounds of the tempest outside melded with the restless murmurs inside. I lay awake, haunted by the flicker of candlelight in Evelyn's room, by the strange behaviors of those around me, and by the gnawing suspicion that the storm was more than whether it was a prelude to something darker yet to come. And as sleep slipped away, I realized the retreat was no longer a haven for creation. It was a crucible, forging fear and doubt into something far more dangerous. The first signs of unease had taken root, and nothing here would ever be the same again. The storm was not just outside the windows, it was inside us all, and I could only wonder how long before it broke completely. Inside the grand estate that served as our sanctuary from the tempest, the atmosphere was thick with unease. I remember watching Evelyn Hart from across the room, her figure illuminated by the flickering fireplace, silver-streaked hair cascading over her shoulders like a dark waterfall tipped with frost. She sat silently, fingers twitching nervously over the scattered pages of her manuscript. There was something about her that nighttime intensity, a fragile edges if she carried the weight of some unbearable secret. I approached hesitantly, compelled by a mixture of admiration and an irrational sense of foreboding. "Evelyn," I ventured softly, "may I see a few more pages? I think I might understand some of your cryptic references." Her eyes met mine, piercing, unreadably in. For a moment, I thought she might refuse. Instead, she nodded, sliding a sheaf of papers across the antique writing desk. "Be careful with them," she murmured. "They're not just stories, they're warnings." Before I could ask what she meant, a sudden, strangled gasp shattered the fragile calm. My heart leaped as I turned toward the saucer-sharp, terrified scream echoing from the direction of her private study. I ran, the heavy wooden floorboards creaking beneath my hurried steps. The door was ajar, and inside, Evelyn lay sprawled on the floor, pale and still. The manuscript pages scattered like fallen leaves around her. Jonas Reed was already there, his broad frame blocking the doorway as he knelt beside her, checking for a pulse. "She's gone," he said grimly, his voice low but carrying a weight that seemed to press down on the very air. The room was suffused with the scent of damp paper and something metallic. Sharp it took me a moment to realize it was blood. The rest of the guests gathered swiftly, drawn by the commotion. Clara Finch's eyes were wide and shining with unshaded tears. "How? Why?" she whispered, clutching my arm. No one had answers. Evelyn's death was sudden, inexplicable. The storm outside seemed to close in tighter, as if the island itself mourned or conspired. Whispers spread like wildfire poison, heart attack, accident, but no one dared say the word aloud, murder. In the chaos, I found myself drawn back to the manuscript. It was no longer just a collection of half-finished tales. It had become a burden, a labyrinth of clues that might explain what had happened. I sat alone in the dim corner of the grand hall, flipping through the pages with trembling hands, trying desperately to piece together the fragments of Evelyn's final story. Each passage seemed to echo real events around the retreat, dark, twisted predictions that chilled me to the bone. Was Evelyn writing about what was to come, or had her words somehow summoned this nightmare? My thoughts spiraled, memories blurring and shifting. Had I remembered the conversation correctly? Was Evelyn's warning genuine, or was I projecting fear onto an innocent fragment? Doubt gnawed at me, a relentless parasite. Jonas tried to maintain order, his voice firm as he urged calm and rationality. But even he looked drained, his eyes shadowed with suspicion and exhaustion. Clara stayed close, offering fragile comfort, but even her warmth couldn't dispel the growing shadow of dread. As the night deepened, the storm's fury became a dark mirror to the turmoil within us. Lightning flashed, casting skeletal silhouettes on the walls, and the wind's mournful wail seeped through the cracks like a ghostly chorus. I realized then that nothing would ever be the same. Evelyn Hart's death was not an end, but a beginning, a descent into a mystery as dark and turbulent as the tempest outside. And somewhere within the fractured pages of that incomplete manuscript lay a truth I was desperate and terrified to uncover. But as the storm raged on, I felt the first flickers of paranoia take root, twisting my perceptions, blurring the line between reality and nightmare. The island held its breath, and so did I, caught in the eye of a gathering storm far more dangerous than any weather. What secrets had Evelyn taken with her, and what horrors were still to come? The manuscript awaited, its pages whispering promises and threats in equal measure. I had no choice but to read on, even if it meant losing myself in the process.